Economic and social challenges faced by Indigenous peoples in Latin America. If you're curious about the lives of Indigenous peoples in Latin America, you're about to uncover some critical issues that they face every day. Let's explore the economic and social challenges that affect their lives. Indigenous peoples in Latin America, who make up about 8% of the region's population, are among the most socially vulnerable groups. One of the most significant challenges is poverty. In countries like Guatemala, Mexico, and Bolivia, a staggering 80 to 87% of indigenous households live below the poverty line, compared to around 50% of the non-indigenous population. Education is another area where indigenous communities struggle. Despite some improvements, access to education remains limited. For example, in Brazil, less than 1% of the indigenous population has access to higher education, and only about 20% have access to primary education. This disparity is even more pronounced in certain communities, such as the Wichi in Argentina, where only 0.5% have access to higher education. Employment opportunities are also scarce and precarious. Many indigenous people are confined to low-skilled and seasonal jobs, such as mining and agricultural work. This is particularly true for communities like the Gran Chaco, where climate change has disrupted traditional livelihoods, forcing them into precarious employment. Health conditions are extremely fragile among indigenous populations. They suffer from higher rates of diseases like tuberculosis, maternal and infant mortality, and chronic diseases caused by environmental pollution. For instance, 50% of indigenous adults over 35 years old suffer from type 2 diabetes, and life expectancy is 20 years lower compared to the rest of the population. Access to basic services like water and sanitation is also a significant issue. In Guatemala, less than 1/3 of indigenous households have piped water, compared to almost half of non-indigenous households. This lack of access to basic services exacerbates health problems and makes them more vulnerable to diseases like COVID-19. Climate change and environmental degradation further compound these challenges. Indigenous communities face threats from deforestation, industrial agriculture, fossil fuel extraction, and mining, which not only harm their health, but also destroy their lands and cultures. The green transition to renewable energies has even led to an increase in extractivist projects, adding to their woes. Political representation is another critical issue. Indigenous communities often lack the political voice to protect their rights and manage their own resources. Only a small fraction of global funds meant for indigenous communities actually reach them, with the majority being spent on external organizations and consultancies. In summary, indigenous peoples in Latin America face a multitude of economic and social challenges, from persistent poverty and limited access to education and healthcare to precarious employment and environmental degradation. Addressing these issues requires systemic change and greater autonomy for indigenous communities to manage their own resources and protect their rights.